Welcome to my end of summer update video in the year 2025. In standard update video fashion, I aim to keep the scopes of these simple, straightforward, and fully scripted, as I prefer to think about what I say carefully when communicating important messages. I'd appreciate a full watch to formulate a more complete picture of who I am, what I stand for, and how I'll be integrating all my knowledge into future videos as well. First and foremost, I'd like to open with an expression of utmost gratitude. I would like to thank every single one of my viewers for making this the best summer I've ever had. There are a lot of interesting things to discuss here. As a university student pursuing a master's degree in computer science, my summer vacation actually takes place over half of spring, from mid-April to the end of August. So technically, the quote-unquote true summer portion in its entirety has indeed been nothing short of amazing. My overall break did, however, start out quite rough, whose roots stem all the way back to the beginning of 2025. So some context is required for a full understanding, and I'll set the stage for it now. As a disclaimer, I do discuss US politics here, but from the perspective of a Canadian. Let's begin. Since Trump got elected in 2024, I really wanted to delve into the why as to how society absolutely failed to hold him accountable for any of the atrocities he's committed in any meaningful capacity. How disenfranchised has society become to the point where believing his digestible lies was more lucrative than the empty but standardized promises of the Democrats and the US political system at large, especially after how poorly he handled COVID and the insurrection at the Capitol on January 6, 2021, to name the most prominent few. Some questions of self-reflection then arose. Are we progressive voices overly fragmented because of infighting and/or purity testing? Or are we simply just outgunned in that society punishes people for doing the right thing, where certain types of inflammatory and morally abhorrent behavior get rewarded? The logical part of my brain tells me that there is some nuanced truth to both, but exploring that further does fall outside the scope of this video, so we'll leave things there for now. To investigate, I decided to start listening to more right-leaning or right-adjacent voices, or apolitical/centrist but pseudo-secretly right-adjacent voices starting in early 2025, maybe late 2024 to be honest. I tried to take an approach where I understand where they're coming from without necessarily condoning their views, actions, or behaviors. Unfortunately, I found myself increasingly stuck in a political slop loop rut over the first quarter of 2025, aka continuing to consume ultimately mindless political commentary which had a super alt-right political leaning. Think along the lines of anti-woke grifters who claim that DEI is the root cause of society's underlying issues as one example. Thanks be to Costco as the coolest counterexample. These creators lure you in with reasonable sounding takes at first, and then go the way of the grifter in some of their other videos. Rinse, repeat, and it's free eats for fascism because they are some of the largest voices who propagate fascist talking points on various platforms to this day. They build their entire careers off of it, build a substantial portion of their audience off it too, of course. As such, I do not recommend the average person do this unless you have the mental fortitude to parse through the information without getting too emotionally invested in the slop one way or another. Reaching out and building bridges is important, but sometimes the conditions aren't safe enough to begin construction all the time. One walks a slippery slope on a razor-thin edge where they can fall right into the hands of bigotry, hatred, and discrimination, among other characteristics of the alt-right pipeline. Once I finished my winter 2025 semester, I began channeling the knowledge and experience I accumulated while being in this rut into something that was both productive and provided closure, such that I broke out of this slop loop once and for all. So, in mid-April 2025, I set out to work on my one and only fully politics-focused video, The Paradox of Politics and Privilege, which discusses what the name implies. In it, I proposed a framework titled The Political Privilege Compass, based on the two-dimensional political compass, more details of which you can find in that video. It's one I developed to better understand how people operate in their day-to-day lives based on both their level of political involvement and how privileged they are. This video ended up being the most controversial one I've ever made to date, which says a lot given what I've discussed on this channel previously. I actually had to end a friendship and sever ties with a specific group of people connected by this friend, which is unfortunate because I was very much looking forward to working with this group to discuss various social issues concerning internet culture. There's enough time and distance between us to where I can confidently say that although they might mean well, they absolutely missed the forest for the trees in terms of the video's scope. They wanted me to get extremely minute points absolutely correct and simultaneously go super in depth on particular examples I presented on the compass way too much. Tensions were actually starting to brew in the month of April before it released on the 30th, dating all the way back to April 1st, funnily enough. As an aside, I did do what you might call an April Fool's bit, where I changed my name to D-Unwoke for a day to parody and poke fun at the sheer ridiculousness and dangerousness of anti-woke grifters. And I made statements that were painfully obvious parodies of their talking points. Many people who I've interacted with on Discord servers understood the joke immediately and played along by diffusing them or diverting by interpreting the word unwoke as saying they wanted more sleep. Everyone except this particular group did pick up on it. Everyone's entitled to how they feel, but to say I don't understand the implications of what I've done is rather short-sighted. In fact, I specifically did this bit because I'm aware of the implications and origins of the word well enough. They did try to educate me on what the word actually meant, but all it did was further solidify why I did it in the first place. I know that before the age of the internet and how it's used nowadays, it does date back to black people and people of color advocating for their rights, and how it later on got co-opted into a buzzword by alt-right grifters. I obviously know being woke is ultimately a good thing, yet we do also need to acknowledge that the way words are used and their definitions do change over time. It's a whole messy, nuanced conversation that we can have in the comments if you'd like to, but more on that in a bit. It's also used as a performative ploy by companies to boost their bottom line while not actually helping the employees they claim to advocate for. So some claim to have DEI policies implemented, care about being perceived as woke without actually providing anything of substance. There is that distinction to make as well. Again, super nuanced, super messy, super complex outside the scope of this video. I refuse to constantly explain myself on this point. If you want to learn more about it, please do research on the topic yourself. In retrospect, this combined with other concerns I started to have with this group, it was a matter of when the pressure was going to reach a breaking point, not if. Every other progressive group I've talked to, both online and in real life, all collectively agree that the video was quite enjoyable, informative, or at the very least passable. In response to me pointing this out, this particular group claimed that every other space that I talked to about this, quote-unquote, wasn't truly progressive, if they didn't care about the exact issues that they did, which is probably one of the biggest red flags of them all. It was specifically about black people and people of color, of which I said in the video that people in this group are, on average, more politically involved due to systemic oppression. I talked about topics such as voting suppression, immigration, gang culture, and how it's engineered by the ruling class to keep them fighting amongst one another to form self-perpetuating oppression. In layman's terms, power structures are absolutely exponentially more to blame than just writing off members of gangs as primitive savages. We know this. And that's what those power structures would have you believe. Do not fall for it, please, I beg you. I learned this all in my sociology class at university, by the way, and it contributed to my minor degree in that area of study. I have no clue to this day how anything I said perpetuates harmful black stereotypes in any conceivable way. I could go on to discuss other problems I had with this group, with the way that this group operated, one of which I will mention here now, such as referencing ICE articles as valid sources for the definition of sextortion, as if no other valid sources exist. In my search engine, I can see a ton of different sources from sextortion that have nothing to do with ICE. And thinking about it more, I don't find the reasoning this group has for using ICE valid. There are absolutely other organizations that do provide tangible steps to reporting sextortion and actually going through the process of receiving justice that have nothing to do with this fucking immigration organization. It pisses me off so much, man. It really does. You can piece the rest of the puzzle together yourself in terms of the many atrocities ICE committed. Ignorance and negligence of all of this is the absolute best faith interpretation I can give this group at this point. It is healthier, ultimately, to just let it go beyond this. They made their stances clear with the way they treated me. They know who they are and they reap what they sow. In spite of it all, I still wish them well and healing in life, but will now put my foot down in saying that any further comments left on my videos from this group will be promptly deleted, and any hostility in any way, shape, or form will result in you being hidden from the channel permanently. This is your final warning. I have had it up to here. It's an all too common, tragic tale where folks in a progressive group end up exhibiting the exact same behaviors they advocated wholeheartedly against. For example, brigading. Granted, it was at a super small scale, but the features and the content of the comments that I received absolutely do reflect brigading tendencies. They have sent good messages, I will give them credit there, but they are less good messengers, which ultimately do harm the credibility of valuable social justice movements. Reform and reintegration must take place for them to more transparently insert themselves back into the greater conversation. Through it all, I have faith that they can do it, but not necessarily in that they'll choose to. It's all up to them, at the end of the day, to answer the call of redemption. As for me, the process of moving on, grieving, and emotionally healing is where I sought to begin anew. At long last, towards the end of May 2025, I was able to close that chapter of my life and prepare for what was to come. I'm grateful that, for the most part, it was all euphoric ascension from there on out. No summer has been as beautiful of a trifecta as this one has, with that trifecta being monumental, productive, and enjoyable all at the same time. As discussed in a previous video, Deltarune Chapters 3 and 4, as well as Phineas and Ferb Season 5 were released in early June. Safe to say, they delivered on all fronts in ways that exceeded my expectations in multiple dimensions. That, combined with 3 remaining months of completely unemployed free time, allowed me to go full throttle with all of it, especially the latter. As of recording this video, I've released blind playthroughs of both chapters, complete with post-commentary for a majority of the secrets that I missed, as well as my reactions to every single episode of Phineas and Ferb Season 5 released thus far, with more to come later on. I made all of these for fun and was ecstatic to see the views of my Phineas and Ferb reactions taking off right around the middle of Season 5A. It's clear that my reaction style is quite enjoyable to watch, and I'll give you a behind-the-scenes peek as to the techniques I employed to avoid triggering copyright detection while also retaining the best viewing experience as much as possible. I used my Geometry Dash propeller block sprite as an on-screen watermark, playing around with the transparency such that viewers could still see what's going on in the episode. What's beautiful about this is that this sprite doubles as a reaction persona, in which I can change the expressions or hide it at any time to best portray key moments. I use subtitles in place of audio, the biggest bastion to conquer in terms of copyright detection, which allows me to mute audio without removing context. Words cannot begin to describe how important having those words in the reactions themselves are. No subtitles effectively means no reactions, without removing context. I also added some editing flair and funny moments to keep audiences engaged, and I'll continue to do so. There is of course also, above all else, my hyper-fixated knowledge about the show overall. It is one of my special interests after all. All the above reasons, combined with the fact that I'm the only one on YouTube who's been keeping up with episode reactions as they release, are likely why they did so well. My metrics went through the roof, pushing me past 1.7k subscribers. It's a specific number, I know, but when your following has been stagnant for a while, you take whatever milestones you can get. What really mattered most to me was watch time. Through my Phineas and Ferb reactions alone, I gained well over 1,000 watch hours, and for the first time ever, the road to monetization was one that began to be tangibly paved in my mind. I genuinely believe I could actually achieve that goal for the first time ever. More episodes on the way mean more reactions and more watch time, and I'll do my absolute best to keep on top of them for as long as I'm able to. It's clear that June 2025 wasn't just a blissful blip on the radar, but the Kickstarter, the catalyst, if you will, of what I hope will be some super bright years ahead. Fandom discourse pending, of course. It's certainly the start of the Phineas and Ferb era for me especially. My ties with the fandom are pretty separate from my ability to make those reactions, so it shouldn't really impact them all that much. But I might make a community post or a very short update video should shit hit the fan, which some of it has already, but we're not going to talk about that here today. Thanks to all of your support, this show will be a mainstay on this channel for the foreseeable future. A future of which I need to talk about next. This summer has been an in-between break period for my 2-year master's program. I completed my first year and will be going back for my second come September. I tried to apply for a few summer jobs at the start of it, which I felt I had a chance of getting, but none of them came to pass. In the current job market, I outright refuse to mass apply for a job within a 4-month period. That's a whole video essay topic in and of itself. In a single sentence, I believe it sucks major doohickey in more dimensions than ever before. From workplace culture, to long hours, to overqualifications, to AI screening, to AI interviewing, to ghost jobs, to scam jobs, and beyond. I have no regrets pursuing YouTube this summer, nor going full throttle with fandom. This is quite honestly the most productive course of action I could have taken with the knowledge, resources, and experience that I have, barring a programming project I absolutely could have done but put on the back burner. Interestingly though, I'll be taking a university course which may or may not help me enhance that project further, so I will choose to interpret this as a blessing in disguise. In any case, come September, I obviously won't have the free time I used to. 2 university courses, plus taking up a teaching assistant position, will take up, I imagine, at least 3/4 of my time, which will leave just enough time for editing reactions as they come out, as well as much needed unscheduled free mental health time, plus taking care of errands and preparing for the eventual job hunt come the winter 2026 semester. YouTube is not a reliable platform, especially nowadays, and even though I'm working towards monetization, I will not likely be a full-time content creator even if I did have the means to do so for mental health reasons in addition to the obvious financial ones. Nothing's off the table entirely, but I have made my stance quite clear in the past, and I still maintain most of the positions I've discussed to this day, and if they are subject to change, I do reserve the right to evolve in such a way. Given that I won't be around as much, I'll also now be talking about limiting my social media time and presence so as to not get overly consumed by any particular school of thought or ideology. This means I'll be doing an unfollowing wave on various socials, mainly Twitter, but potentially Instagram and Tumblr too. This is for me to decide ultimately. It helps keep my feeds manageable and clean, along with maintaining a healthy digital diet, which I recommend all of you consider as well. One thing you should know about me is that I don't operate under the typical assumption of what following/unfollowing means to the regular social media user. Everyone is entitled to follow/unfollow as they please, and emotional regulation is required to healthily process the natural ebb and flow of change. An unfollow for me does not inherently mean I think less of any particular person, so do keep that in mind. Additionally, I've also developed alternative methods of keeping track of various accounts without necessarily following any accounts. The best example of this I can give is the list feature Twitter provides. Pertaining to Phineas and Ferb, I currently have a general feed for almost any and all accounts which frequently discuss any of the 3 shows created by Dan and Swampy, which also includes Milo Murphy's Law, as well as Hamster and Gretel. I also have a dedicated Finnabella/Finnbella feed for more dedicated Phineas and Isabella shippers. I may make more lists in the future as well, should I choose to organize and categorize further. It is a much better alternative for me than just having all those accounts followed under one feed, which can absolutely become overwhelming, right under your nose oftentimes, and especially when fandom discourse gets swiftly underway. Throughout this summer, I was more generous with who I follow than usual because I had more time on my hands to healthily engage with it all. My approach during spells of free time is to cast a wider net, build connections wherever I can, then scale back on follows when my life gets busier. I understand that unfollows mean something more to many, as it did for me years prior, but I've since shifted my interpretations of them in recent years to simply managing my social media feeds in terms of both quantity and quality. There's nothing personal at play if I unfollow you in a majority of cases. Nothing more to say about this. In the final section of this update video, I wish to be transparent with my values and where I stand on certain topics. I've been around the block when it comes to examining behavior in various social spheres. Here's a brief timeline of my near decade's worth of history online to give you a rundown. I started becoming an active member in the Geometry Dash community, a challenging platformer game, in 2017, a game of which I started playing a few years before. It's the first time I've really got into internet communities of any kind. It was where my online presence really started gaining traction. I also had a political arc in 2018 to 2019 following the tragic Parkland shooting. And I did become very vocal about gun violence on social media, and by proxy was exposed to other social issues and politics in a very meaningful capacity for the first time ever. In 2020, the pandemic happened, the Geometry Dash community absolutely popped off, much like a ton of internet spaces, which gave another boost to my online presence. Also, a little Phineas and Ferb movie titled Candace Against the Universe released in 2020, which exposed me to a taste of the Phineas and Ferb fandom for the first time. But I didn't get too involved in the fandom since it was indeed a one-off movie. It was short-lived hype and nothing more, although I did get introduced to a few fandom figures, of which I do know of today. Fast forward to fall 2021, and Deltarune Chapter 2 is released, which is when I fell in love with the game for the first time, to the point where I started consuming fanfiction for it. Then, in December 2021, my mental health crisis, aka my OCD onset, did come into full force and completely broke down my mental state to where I was at my lowest point. I spent the majority of 2022 in therapy recovering from it, and I released my first video essay documenting my journey in early 2023. During this time, I stepped out of gaming and fandom nearly entirely. I got into commentary culture most heavily here, and a decent amount of it was valuable at first, but over time it did devolve into slop. Remember that this is the time before slop was really a mainstream term used, and the cesspool of bad takes grew larger and larger, even from figures I followed, to the point where it came to a head in June 2023, which is when I started taking tangible steps to leaving it. I then got into Deltarune more in July 2023, which is where I'd say I really started dabbling into actual fandom culture, from an internet interaction standpoint, you could call it. In December 2023, Geometry Dash 2.2 was released. I told myself that I would only come back to Geometry Dash if the 2.2 update delivered. Safe to say, much like Phineas and Ferb and Deltarune, it absolutely did, and I really got back into it for most of 2024. I've still been in a relatively close orbit to this day, although nowadays I do just play casually. I check in with the community every now and then, and I do play some levels here and there. The main thing I want to do in Geometry Dash in the future is achievement grinding, actually. Then, in November 2024, Trump got elected, and what I said before about that time in early 2025 applies here. I need not repeat myself. All this to say that I've observed and dissected various behavioral patterns in a variety of internet bubbles in considerable detail so far, some of which appears in my previous videos, but I still have a long way to go. Given that I've gained a new audience and am in an environment where I have more eyes on me than what I've been used to for the past few years, it's important to be transparent with my values. This is not a fully exhaustive list, but it should give you a very informative rundown all the same. I am not a family-friendly creator and haven't been for a few years now. I do not shy away from discussing more taboo and controversial topics that most people avoid looking at or actually dissecting in any sort of depth. In my opinion, while I empathize with certain emotionally charged reactions, an overabundance of them often obfuscate our ability to actually parse through information properly. I am not a fan of rhetoric which forces you not to think and just go along with whatever the popular narrative is just to socially survive in certain spaces. I don't prescribe to that. This is most prevalently discussed in my previous 2 video essays, both of which I'd recommend watching if you'd like to learn more about me as a person and what I stand for further. As a disclaimer though, I will be making some modifications to my first video essay as my views have evolved considerably since then. More will be described in the actual video when it releases, so I'd recommend watching the second one primarily for now, as it's more educational without any of the drama/commentary baggage that some may not be interested in. Other values include the fact that I'm sex positive, I am critical of purity culture, I value critical thinking skills and nuance in a world filled with black and white extremes. I am also aware that nuance is a word used to obscure and prevent the general public from actually meaningfully researching and potentially solving social issues in some cases. All the same, I do still maintain that nuance fosters actual meaningful discussion about various social issues in other cases. Do check out a video on the matter made by Elliot Sang for more information about it. I will discuss topics that make viewers uncomfortable while still maintaining a safe environment to explore that discomfort, a very subtle but important distinction to make there. I staunchly refuse to overly self-censor or dumb things down by using alternative language such as unaligned. I may censor it in text for metadata scraping, searchability, and algorithmic purposes, but verbally, I'd really like to abstain from self-censorship as much as possible. Of course, trigger warnings will be placed where applicable. I thoroughly make an effort to do so, but I am human and of course this is the internet, so of course there's no accounting for everything, which is where good faith interpretation and restorative accountability must apply. The ultimate trade-off that a lot of you need to ask yourselves, and this is a question that I've faced head-on on my own, is that I could either be perfect or I can make a difference. I personally choose the latter. Fiction versus reality, etc. What I will say for now is that fascists are very eager to co-opt progressive language to advance their agendas and oppress us all via sweeping censorship legislation. And certain influential figures, some of which I do follow, end up unknowingly supporting their agenda while believing they're standing up against it. A recipe for disaster that indeed plays right into that rhetoric, but more on that in a future video. All of the above are the main motivators for why I operate the way that I do. I found myself going in that direction as a teen and young adult with some of the values and vitriolic statements I've made years prior, which have been flat out incorrect. Never again, as much as I can. Remember that we're all more susceptible to propaganda than we realize. So do learn to be kind, patient, and compassionate all at the same time to one another as much as you can. Resources are out there for you, with Healthy Gamer GG, a mental health organization dedicated to supporting the needs of the internet generation, being my primary recommendation on where to start with that. This is what I implore you to leave this video with the most. On that positive note, to wrap this up as best I can, thank you all for a wonderful summer. The best one I could have ever asked for. Here's to a prosperous new era for all of us while navigating what is perhaps the most overwhelmingly devastated state of the world, on the global stage of course. I, for one, am choosing a radically optimistic and hopeful approach as an act of resistance against the rise of fascism above all else, and encourage you to at least consider doing something similar. Whatever you choose to do, I send my spark of hope and positive, long-lasting change to all of you. Take care, much love, peace out, enjoy the rest of your summer, and Carpe Diem.